Hello students. Now we'll talk about American structuralism. American structuralism is different from European structuralism because their proponents are different. So we'll discuss now American structuralism. Definition of structuralism. Structuralism proposes the idea that many phenomena do not occur in isolation but instead occur in relation to each other. Different phenomena, different elements in language or in literature or in linguistics, they are several elements but they occur together, they interact with each other and they produce a whole meaning, a whole message, and that all related phenomena are part of a whole with a definite but not necessarily defined structure. There is a definite structure, but it's not well defined before time. So the crux of this definition is that different elements work together to support one whole idea and they are related to each other. And they convey a meaning, a message. So American structuralism, European structuralism was in 1920s, and the other North American structuralism is 1930s to 1960s. So there is a difference between European structuralism and American structuralism. To reconstruct dead languages on the basis of the similarities of existing languages, American structuralism worked on the construction of dead languages, and those dead languages and their rules were constructed on the basis of the similarities of existing languages. Those rules, those languages are dead, they are not present, but they have been revitalized or restructured on the basis of present and living rules. Because those language speakers are dead, and in those days there was no system of recording, no system of language documentation, so all that work is not present. So they have been compared, they have been revitalized on the basis of present existing linguistic rules. Linguistics worked from a historical diachronic perspectives. Just to revise the main points of European structuralism, it has basically three structures. Language has a structure. Language is a system of sign, signifier and signified, as we have studied earlier. Language operates at two levels, lang and parole. Lang is a set of rules. Parole is a physical manifestation of language in the form of utterance or sentence. But now focus on American structuralism and its beginning. It was started because a group of anthropologists started to describe fast disappearing American Indian tribes. There were red Indian tribes and they were disappearing quickly. Basically, when immigrants and colonizers entered America, they started to occupy all assets and lands of America, and real Indian tribes, red Indian tribes, they have to run away from those lands. They got refuge in far-flung areas. So when they were decreasing in number, they were not finding their own identity and place over there. So their language was also dying. When there is genocide, there is also linguistic genocide. When physically a community shrinks or disappears, their language also disappears. Those linguists found that there was no methodology for them to follow in order to describe these languages. So, modern North American linguists started to study the language of those disappearing tribes. In this way, Leonard Bloomfield, 1887 to 1949, he works on those languages and those tribal languages. He wrote a book in 1933 with the title of Language. He worked on behaviorism, empiricism, an approach to acquire knowledge that emphasizes repeatable observations through the physical scenes. He also discussed a stimulus response theory. Stimulus response theory means as animals learn a language by stimulus, they are provided a stimulus again and again, and after hundreds of times repetition, it becomes their second nature, and they follow that action, and in this way they learn a language. And Bloomfield also says that human beings can also learn a language in this manner by stimulus response theory system. Some main points of American structuralism are: linguistics is a descriptive science. The primary form of language is the spoken one. Every language is a system on its own right. Language is a system in which smaller units arrange systematically to form larger ones. Meaning should not be part of linguistic analysis. The procedures to determine the units in language should be objective and rigorous. Language is observable speech, not knowledge. Now we'll discuss these 7 points separately. Linguistics is a descriptive science. Describe what people say, not what people should say. North American structuralists say, discuss contemporary language, discuss societal language, how people are saying, which words are being said by people, how do they construct sentences. Don't teach people that how should they say, how should they speak, or what should be their language. So don't live in the futuristic or in the idealistic world. Try to conduct the experiment, linguistic experiments, that what's happening, how is language changing, and how do people present language. As William Labov has worked at language of elite class and language of poor people, he went to different posh stores and he recorded and he has written those ways of speaking, that how do elite class speak the language. So he also differentiated how do different genders speak and what are the linguistic variations in their language. The primary form of language is the spoken one. When a language appears, and especially in the primitive times when people were not having pages, or if something was so much important, they used to write on some slabs or on the walls of cave. But most of the things were oral. Their literature was oral, their stories were oral, their folk songs were oral. That's why they were very powerful in memorizing anything. They just listened and they memorized because their literature was shifted from one generation to another in this manner. Children also start speaking first, then in the later stages, if they are well educated, they learn how to write it. So writing system came very late, and beginnings in the beginning human beings just spoke So written record is very rare. Not every language has a written form. We find Chinese writing system, Greek writing system, Latin writing system, Phoenician writing system, Semitic writing system, but every language does not have a writing system. Everybody learns an oral language. When a baby is born, a baby learns with the oral method, listen and speak. So learning and teaching method is oral language. And primary purpose of language is to communicate through oral speech. The spoken form comes first, then written forms comes very late. And in the olden days, if a person was not well educated, that writing stage will never come. But every child was capable to speak. Every language is a system on its own right. So philology is the study of old languages and to find their relationships. In this way, Indo-European languages were classified, and Grimm's law was also constructed on the same manner. And comparative linguistics also came into being, that different languages were compared, their similarities and their differences were highlighted, like orange, coat, shampoo, dhoti, lakh, all these words are Sanskrit words, but they are part of English words, English language. Language should not be described in terms of another language, but rather it should be described on its own terms. North American structuralist main point is that comparison of language is not important. Rather, language should be discussed on its own conditions. Its own rules and regulations should be studied. Don't reconstruct a language on the basis of existing languages. Language is a system in which smaller units arrange systematically to form larger ones. These linguists proposed a procedure in which they began analyzing the smallest units and classifying them and describing the patterns into which they combine to form larger units. Okay, they presented a procedure that how language should be analyzed. As we should move from known to unknown, in the same way we should move from smallest unit of language to the bigger unit of language. So morphology means study of words, study of structure of words. Then we should move to syntax. Syntax is study of order of words in a sentence. First of all, words are studied, then sentences are studied. That's why children are taught vocabulary like A for apple. If you learn any foreign language, first of all words are taught, then sentences are taught, or those words were transformed into sentences. Meaning should not be part of linguistic analysis. Bloomfield and many other structuralism followers consider meaning as abstract and unobservable, therefore unscientific. Basically, scientific means which can be observed, which is repeatable every time the same result is produced. So the point is that meaning varies in different cultures, in different languages. So North American structuralists don't include semantics in the linguistic analysis. The procedures to determine the units in language should be objective and rigorous. Structuralism North American structuralism rejected traditional definitions of, for example, a noun as the word that refers to person, animals, or things. Okay. Modern structuralists don't accept a definition of a noun as it has been mentioned in traditional grammars. If you read Palmer's book Grammar, Frank Palmer's book Grammar, you will find that he has introduced these parts of speech in a different way. If you read Noam Chomsky books, you will also find that these terms have been described differently. For example, noun phrase. Noun phrase should be a phrase, it should not be a word. But when we find like a group of words which convey partial meaning, this is the meaning in traditional grammar. But NP or not noun phrase in generative grammar, it can be one word like Danish, name, or even subject. One word is NP noun phrase. In this respect, they provide two observable criteria for defining the items of language, form, and distribution. And these structuralists, North American structuralists, highlight form and distribution of language. Knowledge is observable speech. Language is observable speech, not knowledge. Lang and Parole were rejected as unscientific abstractions. The main objective would be to make a taxonomy of language based on observable samples of speech, corpus or corpora. As I have mentioned earlier, corpus means collection of digitized text, and the plural of corpus is corpora. www.corporabyu.edu. This is Brigham Young University corpora, and these corpora were designed by Mark Davies, and he has worked a lot on BNC, British National Corpus, COCA, Corpus of Contemporary American English, Canadian English, language of judiciary, and language of Times Magazine, and he has made a website corpus, and even COVID-19 corpus has been made recently, film corpus, TV corpus. So the point here that Lang and Parole, which were presented by Ferdinand de Saussure, they have been rejected by North American structuralists. As there is a dichotomy on conflict between British English and American English, in the same way, structuralists of Europe and structuralists of North America, they are also having confrontations. The idea which was presented by European group Lang and Parole, this idea was totally rejected by North American structuralists. Their main objective is that we should make a taxonomy of language. Taxonomy means classification of language, and we should take samples from corpus. Phonemes to morphemes and sentence patterns. Phonemes mean sounds, smallest unit of sounds. Then from these smallest unit of sounds, we should make words, and then those words should be combined and sentence patterns should be constructed. This is the approach of North American structuralists. There are two analytical steps. One is segmentation and other is classification. Segment means, look at the picture. There are different types of people. Now they have been divided into segments. Three different segments were created. And classification. Classification is the more advanced form. Categories have been devised earlier. they are well defined categories, they are structured. Then those units have been classified in different groups and structures, and their characteristics have been presented. So classification is the more elaborated part of segmentation. There are two major phases of North American structuralism. One phase is related with Bloomfield and his ideas, and the second phase is related with Zellig Harris. And Noam Chomsky was student of Zellig Harris. Behaviorism, this was one key point of North American structuralism. There was school of psychology which seeks to explain animal and human behavior entirely in terms of observable and measurable responses to environmental stimuli. Behaviorism was introduced by the American psychologist John B. Watson, who insisted that behavior is a physiological reaction to environmental stimuli and mind is a tabula rasa. On the left side you see a blank slate. Behaviorism says that mind is a tabula rasa, that this is just a blank slate. Whatever you print on it, it will emerge over there. On the right side you look at a picture that a dog is being trained how to jump and go through this tile. So there is a stimulus and they give practice to this animal again and again, and usually food is used as a stimulus. Food is given after this activity, or food is present in front of this tile, so when this animal jumps and get the food after jumping from it. So this practice is done thousands of times, that at that time the time comes when this animal learns that, and this animal makes its behavior that when I jump I will be able to take my food. And behaviorists believe that human beings can be taught language in this manner as animals are taught to behave or to act in such situations. The conditions, this is called operant conditioning by Skinner. The condition reflects experiments of the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov and the American psychologist Edward Thorndike were central to the development of behaviorism. The American behaviorist B.F. Skinner contended that all but a few emotions were conditioned by habit. Now we'll discuss about Skinner. He was born in 1904 and died in 1990. American psychologist, leading exponent of school of psychology known as behaviorism, which explains the behavior of humans and other animals in terms of the physiological responses of the organism to external stimuli. Skinner maintained that learning occurred as a result of the organism responding to or operating on its environment. Operant conditioning, as I have mentioned earlier, that animals are trained with operant conditioning, and Skinner's box. Skinner was expert of animals, and he was of the view that language can be taught in this manner to human beings. Stimulus response model can be delineated in this way, that there is stimulus and freedom to choose. Either there can be reactive responses or there can be proactive responses. Like reactive responses mean there can be emotional based, feelings driven, situational or inconsistent, and proactive responses can be value based, choice driven, strategic and consistent. So stimulus mean the animal or human being is motivated to do something and practice is provided, and then response is the person, the animal learns that activity and performs it in front of the others. Sapir Whorf hypothesis has been summarized in this slide. Linguistic structure and language habits shape perception. That language shapes our thoughts, our worldview. The structure of anyone's language determines strongly influences the worldview they will acquire as they learn the language. Structural differences between language systems will in general be paralleled by non-linguistic cognitive differences in the native speakers of the languages. Linguistic structures predetermine not only how but also what we think. The main point of Sapir Whorf hypothesis is that language shapes our thought. Language shapes our worldview. If there are abusive terms in language, so our behavior will be molded in this manner. If a language is so much sophisticated that it shows respect and respectful titles have been used, there are greetings are present in that language, so human beings will learn that language and behave according to the language. So language is a pivotal power. Language is a crucial power which shapes our thoughts, our worldview, and shapes our personality. So language is not only for speaking and communicative purposes, rather it shapes our cognition, it shapes our mind and brain. Some say that if we remove abusive terms from language, human beings would be ignorant of all those abusive terms or negative words. So, if language is purified from all such words, so human beings will also be purified. This is one view. So, here, North American structuralism focuses on behaviorism, focuses on stimulus response model. It also highlights Sapir Whorf hypothesis that language shapes our thoughts, and they reject parole and Lang concept which was presented by European structuralist. If you have any question, please feel free to ask those questions. Thank you so much.